All right, so this is going to be a several part series, I don't know, covering the infamous John Titor time traveler story that happened back in the year approximately 2000 and 2001. And he allegedly had sent some faxes over to the Coast to Coast radio show, Coast to Coast AM, with some interesting things. I also happen to have some personal private messages through an instant messaging program, I think, that a girl named Pamela, or lady named Pamela, had with John Titor, the guy who claimed he was John Titor. And not that there's anything spectacular released in that I'm going to also read it, though. So this is going to be over an hour long, so I'm not going to do an hour show or video here. I'm going to do one maybe 15, 20-minute video, and then I'll take a break. Tomorrow I'll do another one. The next day I'll do another one. Now, my first forewarning, if you will, I don't know what to make of this. I read it in 2007, the first time I came across it. So he'd already been long gone if it was true. But as I read this to you, keep and do not forget in your mind, and some of this, it's absolutely checked and was even copyrighted in 2003 by the lawyer that worked for him and his, on this planet's parents, so to speak. That's a fact. I checked into that. So, and that was done in 2003. So, all I'm saying is, I know this, the conversation took place. It was all over the internet back then. There's no disputing that. When you hear what he has to say that long ago, this is before 9/11, before Department of Homeland Security, right? Before the Middle East stuff, the way it's been the last 10 years. Yeah, we had Operation Desert Storm in 1990 or 91 or whatever it was. I think that was 90. So everything I'm going to read you, you're going to listen to right now and say, oh my God, this is like appropriate right now. And if you would have mentioned some of the things happening right now, and I mean like as in the last several years, back in the year 2000, people would say you're crazy. That's not going to happen in this country, right? Yet things have already happened here. So without any further interruptions from myself, I will start reading this to you. And some of it, because he's basically on a forum and people are asking him questions and he replies. So it's kind of in that format. And you'll notice sometimes I may repeat the same thing. Like, hey, didn't he already answer that? Yes. And sometimes he clarifies and tells you, well, this is what was meant by when I said that. And he goes into further detail, even though it's the same question being asked. So the gist of this whole thing, he says there are world lines, so to speak. That's what they call them. And that in the year 2036, they develop a machine device that can make you go forward or backward in time. Except the further back you go in time, the less accurate it is. And since there are infinite world lines, basically, infinite things happening, for every positive decision you did in this world line, there's another you in another world line that did not do that decision, did the exact opposite, and so forth. He says there's even a world line, for example, where I'm not the time traveler, you're the time traveler, and you're coming back in the time and getting on the forum and doing what I'm doing right now. What he says is that there are no two timelines that are alike. They are so extremely close, some of them, that you would not know the difference if you were on one and then went to the other one, because they are that close. But he says, no matter what, it seems like there's always a 1 to 2% divergence in world lines. Maybe, and they said, well, like, can you give us an example of something? And he said, well, for example, a sports team that won a game may not have won it in the other timeline or the other world line. So they asked him, well, why are you here with our world line? You know, this one, why did you come here? And he said, well, his grandfather worked for IBM and had a 5100 computer, and one unique ability about that computer, which by the way, at the time he'd said this, nobody knew this. He said it has a unique ability. It can read like 3 or 4 different types of computer language. And this is a machine from like I don't know if it was the 60s or 70s. And that was kind of a secret. So while this was happening and he was going online telling people this, people were scrambling to find out, is that true? And I think it took them to the time he left, I think, to finally contact someone who knew definitively at IBM and said, yep, we never released that information. There's no public information about that. But yes, that's actually true, that this computer, this old 5100, can do that. And it was critical for them to get this computer into the future. I can't think of what the reason was at this point. I know because it could read different code, and I guess because after what he calls End Day or Nuclear Day, World War III, a lot of stuff was wiped out. So there's different computer language stuff that needed to be dealt with, and the 5100 could read it. I think. It's been a long time. So I'm kind of giving you a little foreword here, just because I already read this again last night, and it's like every year that goes on, it's just amazing how much this really starts to make more sense. So I really have to scratch my head and say, well, I guess what I was going back to earlier, saying just keep in mind this was written in 2000, in 1999, and 2000, 2001, roughly. The answers he gives, and then he'll answer the question and then throw in a little additional piece that actually had nothing to really do with the question, but it was helpful and added something else to it that you say, oh my God, if someone was making this up, that piece right there he just added, that wasn't even necessary. Who could do that? Who could make this up in that fashion? And you'll see that it took me an hour to read this. So I keep getting off your track, but I feel like I just want to give you the round, vision here. What are your memories of 2036? In 2036, I live in Central Florida with my family, and I'm currently stationed at an Army base in Tampa. I can tell you that must be MacDill Air Force Base because I live here in Tampa. A world war in 2015 killed nearly 3 billion people. The people that survived grew closer together. Life is centered on the family and then the community. I cannot imagine living even a few hundred miles away from my parents. There is no large industrial complex creating masses of useless food and recreational items. Food and livestock is grown and sold locally. People spend much more time reading and talking face to face. Religion is taken seriously, and everyone can multiply and divide in their heads. How is our world line different from this one? Someone asked him. I would guess the temporal divergence between this world line and my original world line is about 1 or 2%. Of course, the longer I am here, the larger that divergence becomes from my point of view. Next question. Are you drawn back to your world line of origin for any reason? Is instability a problem for you? He says, I'm not sure what you mean by stable. If you mean mentally, there are many things that bother me here, but being with my parents right now, on this world line, his parents, is important to me. Physically, the only thing really wrong is the number of colds I get. He happens to get more colds on this world line back in the past, because again, if he's from 2036 and he's here in 1990, I think it started in 1998, and then 99, 2000, 2001 came, where he goes on to explain that this machine takes a snapshot of the gravity, and the sun, the moon, things have to align a certain way to affect that, which will affect that gravity, and it's getting the next best opportunity to leave. And the only way that can happen, he can't just leave when he wants. This particular gravity field has to be back the way it was or close to it, to where the machine will take him back. And he says the funny thing is, even though he's going back to his world line, he's not actually going back to the world line he left from. Just another world line that was almost identical, again, because that divergence is there. So it's fascinating, yet you got to remain a little skeptical. But again, when you hear everything I have to say, that I'm going to read word for word, you're just going to be like, oh my God, like how is this possible? From 2000, So he says, are you drawn? Nope, Cole's not good. Okay, are you able to return to your home? Yes. Do people know where you are? Can you communicate with your home? No, they do not know where I am, and I cannot communicate with them. Interesting idea, though. From their point of view, I will return almost exactly at the same moment I left. From their viewpoint, I will have only aged more than expected. Now, I want to stop for a second, because I think about some of these people that you hear about. I've been abducted by aliens, and they did things to me and probed me and whatever, okay? But I'm talking about the best of the best cases. There's only a few. Where the person left and then came back with a full 4 or 5 week beard. That kind of stuff. Facial hair is back. They just shaved today, got abducted, seemed like they're only gone minutes, and the next thing I know, they're back at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they got a full facial hair, on their face. That's interesting because the technology to really go from here to another star system has to be by manipulating gravity waves, and he gets into a little bit of detail of that. So if you're manipulating the gravity waves and you're messing with time, what he is just describing sounds like a UFO experience. So that kind of is interesting to me because of the technology they use, I guess I should say. So he says, do people know where we are? Can you communicate? No, they can't communicate. Interesting idea. From their point of view, I will return almost exactly at the same moment I left. From their viewpoint, I will have only aged more than expected. You do not rewrite history. I can only affect what happens here on this world line, the one he's visiting, ours, just as easily as you can. Why do people in this time period worry so much about time travelers destroying their world line when they have no problem doing it themselves every day? My goal is not to be believed. Most people do not take news of the war very well, but I find that everyone believes it's inevitable. Even in your own history, are not great inventions and discoveries made during a war or during a time of war in your effort to kill and maim in new and more efficient ways? No, I do not work for GE or any other company. And by the way, when I'm reading this, it sounds like he's answering other questions all into one, and he did do that on the forums. So I know it may seem confusing, but just bear with me. It's the way it came out, so that's how I'm going to read it. No, I do not work for GE or any other company. Are stock tips really the first thing you want to know about in the future? As a representative of your time period, do you realize what that says about you? You should probably know that this time period is not remembered for its selflessness, charity, or ability to work together. In the future, they look back upon us and say, what a bunch of schmucks, is what he's saying. Why would I want to talk with you? Why don't you believe you have something interesting or worthwhile to say to someone in the future? Again, he answers a bunch of questions. No, the ice caps are not melting any faster than they are now. There is also far less smog and industrial waste in 2036. You asked about the North Polar Ice Pack. I never said the environment wasn't a problem. Doesn't water expand when it freezes? If the polar ice cap melted, wouldn't sea level go down? I don't know if there's enough ice for this to make a difference, and I'm not an expert on global warming. Yes, I realize people become hostile. It's another paragraph. Yes, I realize people become hostile. I don't expect anyone to believe me, and I have nothing to sell. I take no offense by it. Just out of curiosity, if you were a time traveler, what do you think it would take to get people to believe you? Next paragraph. I suppose we could agree that no particular era in history is famous for its development of humanity. But just once, I would like to hear questions like, what is family life like in the future? How does society deal with poverty? Is AIDS, abortion, and drug use still a problem? That was him replying. Next paragraph. Why don't I give you a stock tip? The money you make would dilute the intelligence and forethought that a smart person had in picking the stock all by themselves. If I told you how to get rich, I would be taking money from them and giving it to you. Next paragraph or sentence. I am not aware of any physical change to my DNA or aura. I do, however, seem to be more susceptible to colds. Next one. Yes, you will remember me if you want to. World lines do not change that way, and I will only become an insignificant part of your history. Next one. Yes, I believe in Jesus Christ, and we pray to God in churches. There are some differences you may be interested in. Religion is a major part of people's life in 2036. Pain and change tend to bring people together and closer to God. However, religion is more personal than it is now. There are no huge centralized religions, and people talk openly about their beliefs. It might also interest you to know that the day of worship is Saturday, the day God meant to be the Sabbath, and the 10 Commandments have been restored to the 10 that God gave us. Next one. Life is much more rural in the future, but high technology is used to communicate and travel. People raise a great deal of their own food and do more farm work. Yes, compared to now, we do work long hours. After the war, my father made a living selling oranges up and down the coast of Florida, west coast of Florida. My closest friend raises horses, and another works for a company that maintains wireless internet nodes. Let me scroll down. Next one. Life has changed so much over my lifetime that it's hard to pin down a normal day. When I was 13, I was a soldier. As a teenager, I helped my dad haul cargo. I went to college when I was 31, and I was recruited to time travel shortly after that. Again, I suppose an average day in 2036 is like an average day on the farm. Next one. Yes, there is a post office. The internet is still alive and well in the future. People spend more time talking because life is more centered on the community. I've noticed the same type of effect here when the power goes off. People tend, when he says here, he means here in our time. People tend to come out of their homes and actually spend time with their neighbors. There is a lot more personal trust and less paranoia. Next one. When I'm with my parents, I live in a community made up of tree houses. This is in the future. On a large river in Florida. The river floods sometimes and we have access to the Gulf. Most of our neighbors make a living off the sea or in moving cargo by boat. Next. No new information on UFOs and aliens. Someone, again, he's answering a lot of different questions one after the other. So unfortunately, I don't have the questions with it. So I only get his answers. No new information on UFOs and aliens. I find that an interesting subject myself. Personally, I think UFOs might be time travelers with very sophisticated distortion units. But that might be a bit wacky. I don't think it is. If this is true, that's probably the same technology he has, but more sophisticated. One of the biggest reasons why food production is localized is because the environment is affected with disease and radiation. We are making huge strides in getting it cleaned up. Water is produced on a community level, and we do eat meat that we raise ourselves. Yes, genetic engineering is used, but it's like any other technology. It can be good and bad. One thing we did not do was create more GMO seeds, hybrid seeds. What were people thinking? That's one of the times I got to stop. Year 2000. How much has Monsanto been in the spotlight just over the last couple, 2-3 years? Countries shutting them out, closing them down, and they're just fighting to put more GMOs, more GMOs, more GMOs. This was never a problem back in 2000. It was barely on anyone's radar. And he says, one thing we did not do was create more hybrid seeds. What were people thinking? He threw that little last part out. What were you bozos thinking? Mainly at Monsanto, probably. I am a Christian agnostic. In the parentheses, it says host parentheses. Did he mean Gnostic? Because he said agnostic. Maybe that's something new in the future. I don't know. He says, I do not believe faith alone is enough to get us back to God. I am not sure what happens when we die, but I'm pretty sure it's not a walk in the park. And they asked him something about, are you guys doing any kind of space travel? Or he said, we're working on it. Again, after World War III, it's not on the top of the priority list, I guess is what he's saying. It's more about cleaning up the mess, living, staying away from radiation. My greatest joy is sailing. For fun, I enjoy swimming, playing cards, reading, playing games on the net, and talking with people who live in other countries. As a community, we celebrate much more and have bonfires and dances. My hobby is sorting through old magazines and videos of life before the war. After the war, early new communities gathered around the current universities. That's where the libraries were. I went to school at Fort UF, University of Florida, which is now called the University of Florida. Not too much is different, except the military is a large part of people's life, and we spend a great deal of time in the fields and farms at the university or fort. Most of my memories growing up are not fond. Life was very hard. Simple things make me happy, like hugging my mother and father. Yes, we have cameras, more digital. Film is used like paintings are today. No hologram cameras, though. Yes, we have phones, but the service is through the web. Most power generation is localized. It amazes me how much power is wasted now. Yes, solar is big. There is thought that a singularity generator could also be used, but most people are against it. The singularity generator is what device in his time machine is how it really works. So that's what he was talking about. The elderly are highly revered and looked after on a community level, and so are orphans. There is always something people can do no matter what. The idea of avoiding work is looked down on. Everyone pulls together to keep the community strong. Hats are more common in the future and flashy colors are less common. Dress is much more functional and we dress up whenever we get a chance. I have noticed that no one in this timeline dresses for occasions, even when they have the clothes. Why do people wear shorts to church? We do not spend nearly the amount of time on our hair as people do now. Women like to wear their hair longer and men have it much shorter. Both sexes shave it off when they're in active military service. Far less medical treatment in the future, even though it's more advanced. People die when they know it's time to die. No lasers. Genetic medicine and cloning organs are the obvious new techs in the future. The Constitution was changed after the war. We have 5 presidents that are voted in and out on different term periods. The vice president is the president of the Senate, and they are voted separately. We have cars, just not a whole bunch of them. There is a public transportation from the city to city. Or from city to city. If I could bring some material thing back to your time from 2036, it would be a copy of the new U.S. Constitution. That's interesting. If he could bring one thing back, is what the question was. If you could bring one thing back here to our time from the future, what would it be? And his answer is the new U.S. Constitution, which he does get into a little later and talks about how very little changed. They just had to basically apply the damn thing with a couple subtle changes. That's the new Constitution. But again, year 2000, what moron would be saying from the future to people in the year 2000, I'm bringing back a new Constitution? Department of Homeland Security, not created yet. Patriot Act, not created. The National Defense Authorization Act nonsense, not created yet. The Patriot Act 2, not created yet. You follow me? Why would he say, of all things he can bring back, why wouldn't he say, I'd like to bring back the new money we use, or a new piece of technology? Hey, you talked about this new organs and genetically engineered organs and stuff that cloning organs. Nope. I want to bring back the new U.S. Constitution. Hell of a statement to make in the year 2000. Just got to throw that out there. Can you explain what the purpose of time travel is on your world line? In 2036, a great deal of effort is going into repairing our environment. I was sent to 1975 to get a computer system and take it back to 2036. Time travel is not a secret in 2036, and I expect it will become more common. Why is time travel used? Right now, it is used to get information or items that would be helpful in getting a post-World War III world back to a normal condition. There are 7 other time travelers in my unit. Where do time travelers go the most? He says, right now, most of our practical missions are from 1960 to 1980. There's a great deal of research into later and future periods, but the further you go, the lower the divergence confidence of the world line. So if he said, for example, I got to go back to 1930s, Germany, stop Hitler, let's just say. Because it's more than 30 or 40 years back, the world line changes drastically as the time period gets further. So if he went back to Hitler's time, 1930s, there may not be a Hitler, okay? That whole history may not even exist. That's what he's saying. Has cancer or AIDS been cured yet? AIDS, no. Cancer, some progress. What would you say to any world leaders who might be reading this right now? He says, revel in your confidence today because you will not win tomorrow. Interesting comment in the year 2000. Especially for Americans to hear that. It doesn't mean anything to us. But nowadays, when you see what the hell's going on in our government, NSA spying, Eric Holder, gun trafficking, I mean all this stuff. Benghazi cover-up. Revel in your confidence today because you will not win tomorrow. Interesting comment. Earlier you spoke about the patch you wear on your uniform. You said the spirals represented two paths. One was safe and the other led to God. What does that mean? The safe way is the one calculated to take you in a time where you want to go. The other path will take you to God, in other words, death, is what he says. Both are equally accepted and anticipated before each trip. What is music like in 2036? Most of the same music you enjoy is available on archive. However, the days of megastars playing multiple tracks, studio-produced music, and lip-syncing on a huge stage are pretty much isolated to your time period. Not in the future. Like everything else, music is much less centralized. The general trend is away from computer-generated music, beats and electronic type music, that's what he's saying. The trend is away from computer-generated music and more toward real people playing real instruments. Music is much more of a personal experience. More people know how to read music and play together in small groups. What are the social prejudices in 2036? He said, yeah, there are some. However, as odd as it may sound, it serves a useful purpose in my time. First, you must realize that your experiences with prejudice and mine are different. I would characterize the intolerance you have here as a result of your ignorance and fear. I have observed that people with unfounded and irrational fears about their fellow man in this time have the luxury of not having their beliefs tested. After the war, much of the prejudice you have now was swept away by simple necessity. People had to work and fight together just to survive. This has a way of opening a person's eyes as to the value of fellow human beings. What difference does a color of a man's skin make when you are both fighting against the same enemy to survive or find water or grow food? On my world line, if a man doesn't pull his weight in the community, then we feel prejudice towards him as a burden to us. This feeling of shame he experiences then makes him realize his responsibilities. What is healthcare like in 2036? You would probably not like it at all. I would compare it to what you see in Western movies. We do have hospitals, but there are more family doctors and house calls as compared to what you are used to. There is no real organized healthcare. If you get a serious disease, you die. This, however, has had a tendency to strengthen the general genetic pool. Doctors are more concerned about things like broken legs, snake bites, and delivering healthy babies. What is the entertainment industry like in 2036? Again, entertainment is less centralized. There are movies and TV, but everything is distributed over the net and more people produce their own shows. Let me stop for a second. Year 2000. There was no such thing. There wasn't even an idea of the word YouTube. YouTube was created in 2005. Google bought it in 2006. And are there not an awful lot of people doing their own shows on the web? You can turn on the computer and go on the internet and watch all kinds of stuff. Less time for the TV. Especially nowadays, every year after year, it gets worse and worse for the TV. So this is so interesting for him to say that. Everything is distributed over the internet, and more people produce their own shows. Kind of like what I'm doing right now. And I didn't get started till 2009 and 10. Where am I at? What is it like to start from nothing and work your way up in 2036? Very easy. If you can work with your hands and get along with other people, you will find work. You will always find work. Could you travel in time to escape your original world line? Would you be looked down on for that? From a physical standpoint, I suppose that would work if you were trying to escape a natural disaster. But you must consider that trying to escape by time traveling has its own problems. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by looked down on. Is there some sort of new world government in place by 2011? On my world line in 2011, the United States is in the middle of a civil war that has dramatic effects on most of the other Western governments. When you first started posting online, did anyone believe you? I don't know if anyone believes me now, but you must realize that I don't expect anyone to believe me, or does it affect me one way or the other. I enjoy these conversations too. What would you expect a time traveler to say or do in your time? How far have computers and software progressed in 2036? Good question. I would say the biggest difference is in the reliability of the hardware and software. It absolutely amazes me how willing people are here to accept computer and software failures on such a regular basis. I was very surprised to see how prolific it is. You can look forward to very stringent manufacturing parameters and programming discipline in the future. Think back to the early days of the computer and how much work and cleverness it took to fit those programs into such small areas of memory. Has more and cheaper memory brought better programs or just more programs? That's what he says. As far as technical specifics, I'm afraid I cannot go into too much detail. However, I will tell you that processor speed and memory size take dramatic leaps forward. Who won the Super Bowl in 2001? I do not answer questions like this. Although I don't really know the motivation for the question, I can guess. If a time traveler had knowledge of your future and you can only ask one question, what would this be? Besides, can you tell me if it rained in New York on June 4th, 1932? You are from their future, so should you know that? Good point. What type of money do you use in 2036? It is not very different than it is now. Yes, we have money and credit cards. However, like everything else, the monetary system is decentralized. Banking is based mostly around the community structure. There are no multinational banking or computerized economic systems. There are also no income taxes. Interesting. Are radio location systems still used on livestock? RFID. Some of the larger farm communities use electronic markers and fences. I am not a farmer, so I don't have very many details about that. Is the GPS system still in use in 2036? Oh, yes. In fact, the unit I have with me works here. I'm not sure why that surprises me. There are also a great many communications and internet satellite systems. Do you still have an American flag? What does it look like in 2036? Yes, we still have the flag. There is a debate about changing it from 50 stars to 5. Reason being, remember that thing about 5 presidents are voted in? That's because there's 5 regional areas of America. Several states in each area decide to join the area that they're in. Some have an economic benefit, some have a military benefit, some have a farming benefit. He may go on to talk about that in a little bit. Do any of the states have new names? Not that I can think of. No major cities anyways. I am aware that some other smaller towns changed their names after the war, and most universities have the word fort before them on my world line. Is it safe to fish in 2036? Yes, we can fish. There are some areas that are still too dangerous to spend a lot of time in, so we can't fish in those areas. Is there public transportation in 2036? A high-speed train system connects the larger cities. Roads are still used for cars, and many people ride horses and bikes. What music and books do you enjoy? Do you play an instrument? I read a great deal of history. I like piano classes. I like piano classics and some older rock and roll. Why did that type of music go so far downhill? No, I don't play any interest myself. Are you taking pictures and video while you're here? Oh, yes. What is your favorite food? It is very hard for me to find food here. It all scares the hell out of me. I found a couple of local farms where I'm reasonably sure the raw food is safe, and my mother started a garden for me on this world line. The him here on this world line is only 2 years old, by the way. And yes, he has met himself. Do medical advances in 2036 have anything to do with genetics? Again, I'm no expert. I believe there's a great deal of progress in treating the cancer cells with modified viruses, so I guess the answer is yes. Next question involves details of natural disasters and temperatures in the year 2036. That's one area I've decided not to talk about, sorry. The average temperature worldwide is a bit cooler, though. Is time travel discussed on the web in 2036? Do you recognize any websites now from the future? Time travel is a major point of social discussion. I'll have to check when I get back. I guess about the websites, I don't know. Most of the larger servers that were in these major cities were lost or destroyed. I'll try to bring a copy back with me. Perhaps you can check that in your 2036. Does anything happen in the year 2012? I've heard stories about the world ending. In my 2012, I was 14 years old, spending most of my time living, running, and hiding in the woods and rivers of Central Florida. The Civil War was in its 7th year, and the World War was 3 years away. Yes, there are unusual events in 2012, but they do not cause the world to end. Unfortunately, I've decided not to discuss events that you or I can do anything about. It is important that they be a surprise. And then he ends it by saying, perhaps you are familiar with the story of the Red Sea and the Egyptians. The question lists a number of paranormal conspiracy theories and then asks about weather control in the year 2036. I must admit I am unfamiliar with most of what you have asked here. I am aware of the HARP system, but I don't know how they would control weather with it. You understand, this is an average person. Average people don't know what HARP is. They don't know all of the conspiracy stuff that you and I know. And some of you don't know everything I know, and I probably don't know some of the stuff you guys know. So to have an average person who's now a time traveler have the answer to everything and know everything, it's not going to be very likely. So he has heard of HARP, but does not know about it controlling the weather. Please describe any details you can about the education system in 2036. Let me see where I'm at. 37 minutes. Oh my God. I got to stop after this. I'm not even close. I'm not even close to being like maybe a quarter of the way. Please describe in any details you can about the education system in 2036. The education system has been through many changes. School in 2036 is no longer a political indoctrination system. Are you kidding me? Year 2000. That's his answer? How about now? One of the head ladies from the Department of Education did an interview a couple years ago with Alex Jones, saying she has documentation, and when everyone would leave the office, she would go grab it and see what was in there, and found this agenda to political indoctrination, teach these sheeple our way, teach them to become slaves to us, basically. And this lady's like in her 80s. She did an interview with Alex Jones, and I forget her name, but she was very high level at the Department of Education. Now, that was a few years ago. Not 13, 14 years ago when this was written. The education system has been through many changes. School in 2036 is no longer a political indoctrination system, and students, quote, he quotes it, quote, students learn how to learn. That's why people like us, my wife and I, we homeschool, because we know what they do in school. That's an interesting statement, because students actually learn how to learn. Think for themselves, too. Since community activity varies from place to place, the emphasis on basic reading, math, and language is augmented with skills particular to the community. One school may have emphasis on farming, while others teaches woodworking. Having children is a bit difficult and less common in 2036. A typical school day involves a setting very much like it was 100 years ago, with smaller classes and few administrators to teachers. Other areas of study that are less common now, this is interesting. Very interesting. I like this one. Other areas of study that are less common now on this timeline here Other areas of study that are less common now are history, citizenship, and personal economics. In his world line, history is extremely important, citizenship is extremely important, and personal economics. Now, I think I read another one of these where he re-answers that question again, and I could have swore he added that knowing the Constitution was also in there. We may get to that, but again, I got to stop here. Let me just see these last. I'm going to read two more. And holy crap, that's kind of long. That's all right. I'll read it. It's not that long. If you could post a picture of money that you use in the future, that would be more impressive than your time machine pictures. I am disappointed that you feel I'm trying to impress you. Why would I bring money from 2036 with me? Besides, isn't that something that could be easily faked? Now, if I told you I was your cousin's brother and I knew about that scar on your left leg, that would convince you. Where do you think all that water came from in the Great Flood stories? I believe the explanation, he says, for the Great Flood stories originate with the changes that occurred near the Mediterranean at the end of the last ice age. Even on this world line, there is a great deal of evidence to support the fact that sea levels did change radically in isolated areas worldwide. I also heard someplace that if the ice mass in Antarctica melted today, sea levels would rise about 100 feet. I'm not exactly sure if that's true, but still, Mount Everest might be a bit of a stretch. I do, however, agree with you that there are no physical paradoxes, but for the opposite reason, or opposite reasoning. In 2036, community life is a bit different. People are valued and judged based on their contribution and worth. Work is organized around the family, and the value of that work is assessed inside of the community. Most communities range in size from 1,000 people to 4,000 people. If a family wanted to move from one community to another, or if a son or daughter wanted to move to one community, they must apply and be interviewed by the community leadership council. During this process, the family or individual is during this process, the family or individual is evaluated as to whether or not the work or skill they have is required or necessary to that individual community. Once accepted, the family or individual is expected to uphold their end of the work and support the community. If they do not, the community stops supporting them, and they are forced to change their attitude or move away from the community. The family work we did was picking, sorting, and shipping oranges by sailboat up and down the coast of Florida. We were expected to produce a certain amount for the community and a certain amount for other communities as agreed to by our CLC. In exchange, we received power, water, a certain amount of food, and other necessities that were produced inside our community. I see this message board as a small community, and I have no other way to value the contributions of others on it other than what my past experiences tell me. I have tried to answer as many questions as I can without being annoying, repetitive, inappropriate, and for some of you, entertaining. Under these conditions, I have decided to seek guidance from all of you, the other members of this community, as to whether or not my postings are of any value to the direction of these discussions. If they are getting distracting or repetitive, I will stop and continue to enjoy reading your thoughts and ideas. I'm going to stop there because this is getting out of control, and I am nowhere near even halfway, not even close. This is fascinating, but you got to take it with a grain of salt because this is definitely weird. But it starts to make a lot of sense, and I haven't gotten into it. So, I mean, again, I'm like not even, I don't even think I'm a quarter. I said half. I don't even know if I'm a quarter. Man, this is going to be like an 8-part series, but I think you're going to enjoy this. Take care.